And here we are on Observer now with school board member Janie Ruddy. Very excited to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm excited to join you, Rich.
And it is an exciting time for the Flagler County School District. For the first time since 2019, Flagler Schools, you have earned an A rating. Just explain to us what that is and the significance of that achievement.
Sure. So beyond proud of the students who worked really hard and took these assessments very seriously to show that the work that's being put into the classrooms every day. Of course, the teachers, as well as every staff member who comes in contact with those students, that the bus drivers who set the tone for the day, the school counselors who are helping to get those students onto the graduation stage. And of course, our district staff and Ms. Moore, who has been instrumental in establishing a vision that all students can learn and ensuring that we are steadfast in a strategy and not just kind of grab at all the bells and whistles or try to game the data or the student enrollments in a way that could be more advantageous. So what an A rating really means is that according to the state guidelines, and every year they change the cutoff based upon how many schools perform at that A level. So this particular year, I believe, is 67% of the students need to reach that growth goal. And that means different things at different grade levels. Obviously, graduation rates also count into that score, in addition to the academic growth and the grade level attainment. So last year we were very close, and this year Ms. Moore made a very clear message to every team member and every student that we needed to all grow in our individual categories by 1 or 2 points. And so this year we were one of, I believe, 34 school districts to attain this rating, which is wonderful. At the same token, as a school board member, my commitment to our students and our community is to not measure us only by the Florida standards, which, as you recall, changes in the last 10 years meant that Florida adopted its own standards, but that our achievement goals move beyond Florida so that we can be more competitive nationally, because our students, and it is the norm that people move very fluidly throughout our country. And we want our students to be successful, whatever path they choose, whether they stay within Flagler County, Florida, or go beyond the Florida borders.
And it's interesting. It's been quite a journey if you think about it. 2019 into 2020, you had COVID, and a lot of recovery for a lot of school districts had to happen after COVID. It disrupted everything.
Right.
And then here in Flagler County, you had a change in leadership. You mentioned LaShaka Moore. You go from Middlestat to LaShaka Moore. Just talk about that journey to get from 2019 to getting back to being an A district.
Sure. I think that we've been blessed with many superintendents that each have their own challenges to manage. And unfortunately, the big shakeup with the superintendent leadership, I think, took us off our trajectory for a little bit during those very critical times. But yes, the COVID recovery is a real thing. Just nationally, even globally, students' scores have suffered. Not just scores, but really their ability to be essentially where they should be in their intellectual and cognitive development. That's really what we're talking about, not just necessarily a score on a test. And of course, those were all due to factors that were out of our control. Now, what I will say is that I think that, and I've seen this in my other roles in ed tech since leaving the classroom, is that Florida was uniquely situated to be to really overcome the learning loss from COVID more so than many other states. We in Florida had long adopted a statewide LMS platform, and educators were already essentially experimenting with it in order to close that communication gap between the classroom and the homes for parents to stay on top of what their students are doing so that parents are very clear on what the assignments are. And then specifically Flagler County and the residents of Flagler County, whose strong support continued the half-penny sales tax, has allowed us to not only take essentially that encouragement from the state level, but really exceed the standard of excellence when it comes to technology incorporation in the classrooms and technology devices with that half penny under Mr. Deasing leadership. We have a very robust set of educational technology coaches who are skilled not in the technical side, but in the curriculum and the educational instructional integration component. And we're very fortunate to have those roles. So we are using our screen time very wisely in our classrooms.
So let's talk about the budget a little bit here. Explain to residents how the district's budget looks and if there are areas that we have to cut, if the Flagler County School District has to reduce its budget, what programs or services should be protected?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm still, and the rest of the leadership staff at the district are digesting the newly adopted budget. And it's complex because along with the budget comes a lot of new bills that we have to enact. So for example, guidance counselors who often provide additional administrative duties, their roles are now a little bit more constrained, which I believe is great. We want guidance counselors focusing on their time in the area of their field. But that in addition to having to essentially market virtual school options when even if we have that virtual school option within our own district, we don't receive the same funding as we do a student who's in a brick and mortar school. Those are going to be additional challenges that we have to take on in addition to a shrinking budget. So I previously mentioned at several school board meetings, essentially that if you took your household income and you froze it and increased it essentially 1 to 2% a year, while inflation as a whole has gone 3, 4, 5, 6% year over year, especially in the last 5 years, that is going to be a huge imbalance. This year alone in the gas expenditures, which were totally unforeseen, causes a huge hole. And what taxpayers I don't think realize is that the voucher system and the way that the schools are reimbursed for the students who are in the seats, there's an additional set of monies that are spent in order to stabilize schools, because under the current budget systems that have been put into place over the last several years under this Florida leadership, the budgets are so very thin that most school districts, if adhered to, would fail essentially. And so there's a stability bucket of money that is infused into school districts. And that's, I don't think, really on the surface that everybody can see. And so that is also a question on how long will that continue? Is that in jeopardy? But to your question specifically, under this particular budget, one of the biggest challenges we have, which I do agree in, is the bonus for teachers who have worked for 10 years or more. There was recently, I believe about 6 years ago, that big increase in starting teacher salaries, which was wonderful and amazing. However, if you worked in the school system for 10, 15, 20 years, you're essentially making the same amount as somebody who started in year 1 as a year 10 professional. So this budget earmarks money for that. However, what that does is we always receive some sort of money in that bucket called the TSIA monies. They've essentially required us to limit the scope. So each year, Tallahassee seems to take less and less local control or allow less and less local control. And so this year, while I'm energized by the fact we can reward and hopefully balance some of the offset for our more seasoned professionals, my worry is what that does long term. In terms of budgets, for me personally, I can only talk about what I would prioritize if we were to have to cut funds. And of course, this would require additional research in terms of the pros and cons of each. But the items that I would weigh, number one, we have provided free lunch and breakfast for all students in the county since COVID. And that was bolstered by monies that were provided federally. Those monies have diminished. And so what we might look at is not necessarily returning the cost to the original amount, but perhaps a scaled introduction. The other item obviously is, which I think would hurt our enrollments as we need to stay marketable as parents have more and more choice to where students go, is that we would have to slow down perhaps on our upgrading or modernizing of some of the classroom equipment. In terms of our staffing, specifically, right now, we accept all years of tenure from incoming professionals into our county. And that wasn't always the case. Many times in the past, there was a cap. If you had 10 years or more or 20 years or more, you would be capped at that 10 years and start at that salary schedule. So we would maybe have to look at some of those items. For me specifically, I would evaluate a matrix on what are the items that would affect our ability to pursue academic excellence on a national scale the least, and which ones would be least disruptive to students and families.
And I'd imagine being in the position you're in, dealing with a budget like that in this day and age where it seems rising costs are everywhere, whether it's fuel or groceries. I mean, everywhere you see rising costs. Is that something you as a school board member see in some of the things you encounter?
Absolutely. I mean, all day, every day. And it is something that we have a leadership staff that I press on. I think anybody who watches a school board meeting knows that I'm always asking for more, that I'm always trying to find another way in a collaborative way, challenging each other. And for example, when tariffs first hit, we clearly saw an increase in the costs for particular supplies. And so we had pushed and inquired, well, can we buy certain things in bulk now before tariffs hit a certain threshold? But the director of facilities, as well as then Mr. Freeman, came up with some strategies on essentially how to capitalize more strategically on our purchases, which for a time did not necessarily save money, but reduced some of those increases that we did see. And so being very strategic is the first level. And as we grow as a district, and we have a leadership team that's more and more adept, relying less and less on outside consultants for services that we potentially could essentially go and research or essentially partner with other school districts or leverage our partnership and enrollment in NEFEC a little bit more strongly would be my preference. But yeah, I see it every day, decisions that have to be made. And what's concerning to me is that this year, we've now seen since April of last year, a clear skyrocketing chart of expenses regarding employee health care. Because we are at a self-funded school district, that means that we have to cover all of the expenses. And you know that all of the health plans come with a maximum out-of-pocket amount that one would pay in a given calendar year. However, due to the rising costs of those items, which were again unforeseen by actuaries when we signed or came to the healthcare agreement last year, we have been over budget. Essentially, our self-funded benefits program has been bankrupt. And so going into this year, I was really pleased that I've pushed very strategically, as my bachelor's degree originally was in healthcare administration. So I'm very versed in health insurance plans and how that marketplace works. And so we pushed for a very unusual plan where it is not a typically traditional plan, but instead works with an organization called Claim Doc, where we're asking for the providers to essentially agree to charge only an X% higher than what the federal government negotiates for Medicare. Whereas before the health insurance transparency laws came into effect, we had no idea how much essentially providers were charging those who are not on Medicare. So this year, that's what our staff and teams have been provided as an option, and they've been very resilient in working through that change where they have to essentially pre-vet their provider and ask them to be on this plan if they aren't already. So that's a strategy that is a difficult choice, but I pushed hard for because our health insurance costs have been out of control as a result of, I believe, tariffs.
Now, you brought up vouchers when you were talking about the budget, and I want to get your opinion on the whole school choice and voucher program going on in Flagler County, not Flagler County, Florida as a whole. What is your take on school choice and voucher programs?
Sure. And not just Florida, countrywide, right?
Right.
Texas, Ohio. So, I, growing up, I was born in the 70s. So going to school in the 80s and 90s, I saw the same things where inner city schools were not performing. Students were stuck. They could not essentially reach their potential because of certain factors. And so I truly do not believe that any student should have to stay in a failing school. With that said, after that, I believe in the 90s or somewhere about there was introduced this idea that you could take your child to any school in the district. If you were assigned a D school based upon your residence, you could go to a B school, you could go to an A school. I believe in that wholeheartedly. What I do not believe, and what I believe is a theft of the taxpayer money, is when you are, number one, taking taxpayer money to pay for private schools that do not have the same standards of accountability and fiscal transparency that school districts do. In addition, the voucher program, specifically in Florida, that was set up, was not set up in an organized, complete fashion. It was very haphazard. And for the last several years since the Step Up organization, so essentially now we have the Florida DOE, we have Step Up that is supposed to manage those vouchers. However, there has been a discrepancy of where the money is going. For example, you could have a student who starts off being homeschooled, private schooled, whatever they're doing with those vouchers, comes back to public school, and then we're educating that child without receiving those funds because they did not track them. This year, the legislature had an opportunity to fix that. While they did increase some transparency protocols for Step Up, they didn't fix it. So you can't tell me at the same time you're going to give us $80 more per student in FTE, but yet continue to allow millions of dollars to be untracked or not tracked efficiently so that it's going to the programs to which the student is receiving. And why taxpayers are not as a whole up in arms in this, I think goes to one thing. The voucher program has been one of those items that has been a divider between our communities. But you can believe in school choice, but still also require transparency in the fiscal management of your taxpayer funds. And that is what is not happening currently.
How about artificial intelligence? Everybody's favorite subject these days. Skynet is coming, the Terminator, everything's going to end. No, I'm just kidding. But this is a serious issue. And it's a very interesting issue when it comes to the schools. It's becoming more common in the classrooms. How do you think schools should embrace AI while preventing students from being overly dependent on it or even using it to cheat?
So I love this topic, and actually my daughters, my husband and I, we debate this often. And just in my role outside of the school board, I work with AI often. And so I've seen a lot. I've been also part of the committee for the AI policy integration through the Florida School Board Association. And I've seen a lot in terms of how policy can help protect our students as well. So when it comes down to AI, number one, the internet came out essentially when I was probably early college. And everybody thought, well, that was going to be the end of thinking, right? Nobody needed to know knowledge-based information.
I haven't had a thought in 5 years, it's not.
Yeah. So while that's somewhat true, right? We, as educators, we evolved in terms of saying, well, why would somebody need to memorize the periodic table now when it can be at a touch of your fingers, right? So I actually believe AI is the next step to that level, where I feel that students who actually don't have a higher level of what we call evaluation, analysis, and synthesis level of cognitive abilities are going to be at a drastic disadvantage. Because when I work with AI, for example, I have to predict what I need in the output. I have to give the model specific instructions. I have to be creative in determining what could I have this create for me. For example, I didn't go to school for computer coding, but just yesterday I used Copilot to introduce me to something called VS Code, which allowed me to create massive amounts of HTML code for content that I'm authoring in a corporate training program, and then have it essentially, instead of me manually putting it into the system, it does it for me through Claude, and I have them working in tandem. Does that mean then I'm cheating because I didn't copy and paste from the Word document directly into the LMS platform? No, in fact, think about the level of, let's say, creativity, research, development, analysis, and synthesis that requires. So actually what I'm more afraid of is that when we incorporate AI sooner to that level, students who have not built or struggling with the lower levels of cognitive function are going to be further behind or disenfranchised by education. Now, the opposite side of that is AI, what we have to do in a classroom nowadays, is invaluable. And what maybe people don't really realize is you're using AI every day. When you turn on Netflix and you see the stream that comes up, it's personalized to you. When you see, for example, I accidentally left my hose on the other day and I got a message from the water company. Somebody didn't really care enough to look at my meter. It was AI, right? So, right. So, and I went out, I'm like, oh goodness, yesterday I left the hose on. So that's wonderful, right? So what we need to do, however, is make sure that, number one, we protect our students who may not be as emotionally robust to understand the differences between a live companion talking to them, a live person through text, and AI. Protect them from companionship AI. That's number one. Number two is when we introduce AI for instruction and to differentiate that instruction, is to not give them the answer in the program, which many of our adopted platforms do this very well. They will actually provide the student hints and then automatically give them a recommended lesson if they missed so many concepts in that particular skill. Where we can go from this is amazing. And Florida is far ahead many of their states. I've been having discussions with Dr. Israel from the University of Florida, who is one of the founding members of the AI task force. And I do agree in Mr. Leake's push to control or ensure some of this AI doesn't turn into companionship when we're offering it to those students. So I think that we're actually well positioned ahead of many other states. And I feel very confident that we're going to come out ahead with this, but it does require tremendous professional development for our educators to understand how to use this effectively, just like it did the computer. When I started teaching, I had one computer in the back of the classroom. When I left, every student had a device in their hands, and I took advantage of that.
One of the more interesting subjects I've seen come in front of the dais for the school board is the Guardian program. School safety always is a top priority. We want the students to be safe. And the Guardian program would be, I'm not sure if I got this right, but it would arm volunteers or staff members who would be fully trained by the sheriff's office. Do you think the Guardian program is a positive when talking about keeping students safe?
Sure. I mean, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You can't learn unless you feel safe. And it is one of our top goals in the district, as well as every school has it essentially in their mantra. And it's why this past end of the school year, we started to test and pilot some weapons detection systems. And actually, because of AI, there's been huge advances to this technology. So in terms of the Guardian program, there are many models. It can go from deciding to arm teachers. It could be arming, essentially hiring your own security team outside of the sheriff's office. So there are different layers and different levels that a district can implement. I do not feel that anybody is better equipped to protect our students than our actual sheriff's office. However, hearkening back to the budget, the sheriff's department has on average received a 5 to 8% increase in their salaries every year that we as a school district must match. And this past year, the Safe Schools Act or bill was not, money did not increase. So that's another pot of money we're going to have to take out of somewhere else. But I feel strongly that there is no better option than our actual sheriff's assigned SRDs. If we went to a system where it was the Guardian program and we had to hire an outside agency, essentially a security team, we do not have the same, when it's a private company, you don't have the same insight in terms of how effective, how are they handling their, what are their hiring practices? What are their training requirements? I would kind of challenge this, and it's no disrespect, but if you were in a mall and you heard gunshots, would you run into the store with a mall cop or would you run into the store with a sheriff's deputy? Right. And so if that's what depending on, I know what my choice would be. And so therefore I know what the choice for the students would be. I absolutely do not believe in volunteers having, being in the classrooms with armed weapons. And I do not believe in having teachers armed because I know the model was, well, you could have certain teachers who secretly have access to the weapons. And the whole idea under school safety, and I think that David Bostardette would underscore this, our school safety director, is that the best prevention is to ensure weapons do not get into the campus. And in fact, our whole strategy since Marjorie Stoneman has been to harden the exterior. If now it becomes known that beyond the school resource deputy, there are weapons on campus, well, now people can walk in past the weapons detection systems that we may or may not implement, say hello to the front desk, walk right by everybody, and then target those individuals who are less trained and have those weapons. And now they're in the building past that hardened exterior. I do not feel that is a smart strategy. And I've been exploring other options. There are, for example, camera AI software that you can integrate with the cameras that are already in classroom hallways that will alert you to suspicious items. In fact, I watched one demonstration. I didn't even realize the item was a weapon in the demo video. It looked like because the video is all grainy and fuzzy. Those AI systems are looking for shape and density, light reflection, all of this type of data. And that's going to be way faster, more effective at early detection than additional, less trained guardians who are not sheriff's trained employees.
Just one more question on school safety. And I have to ask this question because I see a lot of things on social media. Bullying continues to be a concern for some parents in the county. Do you believe the district's current policies are effective? Are there any changes you would support?
Yes, so we actually, every year, we evaluate our student code of conduct policy manual, as well as the student code of conduct manual that goes out to parents and teachers and students. And this last year, there were some big changes in the bullying section. For example, I did have a very difficult time reconciling. One of the required elements was that the offender, in order to be qualified as bullying, needed to have some sort of power over the other. Well, when you're talking about, two seventh graders, right, what power does another seventh grader have over another? I think we were applying adult definitions, right, to children. So one thing that was implemented to essentially improve that is, let's say that the first bullying incident, and my heart would go out to that student if not enough evidence was gathered to meet all of the requirements. However, there's now a reporting system that goes actually to the state on the level of bullying investigation offenses. And so we can track that because bullying is typically a behavior pattern. So with that, I will say that on the flip side, people sometimes are not nice to each other. This is adults, right? This is children. Children learn from their adults in the communities around them. They're learning from the media, the social media, and our current country leaders that being nice is almost a weakness now. And so it's interesting that we're trying to expect better from our children when we ourselves are not modeling what we know is to be right. And the more and more our ethical and moral fabric is ripped at that level, how can we ever expect students to also rise above it, or to be able to rise above it? With that said, I will see, I've had 3 children in Flagler schools, and none of them went through without some sort of challenge in their life, right? In their school life. But I will say I'm amazed every time with the essentially capacity for students to accept others who were different from them in a way that was not the norm when I went to school. When I went to school, if you didn't have name brand socks and Guess jeans, you were cast aside, right? You were unpopular. I remember stressing over what I was going to wear to high school, and I didn't want to look different. What kids today now accept is whole 180 degrees different. The amount of empathy I see our children have, I feel, has evolved. So what I want, however, is that every bullying case be taken seriously, and that, however, on the offender side, we never want to label a child a bully who isn't truly having those psychological issues. And if they are, that we're not just providing the discipline, but we're providing the counseling or providing to the parents some resources for counseling to help that child, whatever they're going through, that is coming out and attacking and manifesting in their behavior towards others.
Okay, on a lighter note, we recently had graduation, students heading into summer break. What are your messages to students who just graduated and they are heading out into this world?
My biggest piece of advice, because, you know, it's always easy to think back and, you know, hindsight's 2020, is the things that I most regret in life were the items that, even though when I failed, I gave up, right? What I wasn't disappointed was the failure. That's going to happen when you try new things. But you only really fail when you give up entirely. If it's truly your dream, you're going to keep at it. You're going to dig, you're going to find a way. And that could be from something small to your career path. So I would just have them remember that a failure is really only a failure when you truly give up. And if it's your passion, find a way, find a community that believes in you, you know, come back to our Flagler Schools family. We will always help and guide you and provide you that support, encouragement, and even network resources, right? We have a huge set of alumni throughout the country and world who have achieved so many great things. So you're not alone.
There she is, Flagler County School Board member Janie Ruddy. Thank you so much for helping us get your perspective out there on Observer Now. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich, and have a lovely 4th of July.